picture is we knew it was going to be tough, particularly in the years ahead. But it does seem like the size of overspends in the current financial year are more than you could have easily expected from the outside. So you can kind of see why Rachel Reeves was angry.
Thank you for that. Do stay with us. So let us now get the early thoughts of David Phillips from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, one of our more respected economic watchdogs and think tanks, monitoring bodies, independently looking at the public finances. David Phillips, welcome.
Good afternoon, John.
So, David, so we heard therefore from the Chancellor suggesting this. She was exposing a scandal. I think she used the word scandal. I think she probably used it more than once. That having looked under the fabled bonnet of the state, the public finances, you found there, well, horror after horror, of which she was unaware, she claimed. And all sorts of remedies are now on the way, some of them we've heard about today, that were not foreseen, that were not planned. And from the other side, from the opposition side, the former government, they say this is a bogus performative exercise. Do now please give us your objective independent verdict.
Well, I think we always knew there were big pressures coming down the line. The plans that both Labour and the Conservatives set out for spending for 2025-26 and beyond were very, very tight. We always knew that would be inconsistent with maintaining services, let alone making some improvements to services which are often in pretty dire states. So we knew those plans for 25-26 onwards would need to be topped up or services cut back. And if they were topped up in terms of spending, that would mean either breaking your rules on borrowing or tax rises that hadn't been set out in the manifestos. And of course, there were a few small tax rises in the Labour manifesto.
Yeah.
I think also the sort of big picture, it was clear that at the moment, public services were in a pretty bad state. I think when private sector pay is growing at 5.5%, I think it was already probably clear that 2% pay rises weren't, likely to kind of really cut it this year. So I think even this year, you could probably anticipate some of this. But looking at the detail, I think there is stuff here that really would have been probably a surprise when coming through the door and is quite shocking. So, for example, some of the issues in terms of budgeting for asylum and illegal migration, some issues related to the sort of pay overhang from previous awards. The 9 billion that Rachel Reeves talked about for public sector pay is for the new awards for this year, but there's an overhang from last year's pay awards which hadn't been fully funded. So I think, look, the big picture is we knew it was going to be tough, particularly in the years ahead, but it does seem like the size of overspends in the current financial year are more than you could have easily expected from the outside. So you can kind of see why Rachel Reeves was angry.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a pretty clear verdict from you. It cannot be dismissed, then, you suggest, on your analysis, as a performative exercise by a new government, which always wanted to put up taxes and is using this as a cloak, as a cover for that motive. Although some of this we did know, and we recall well enough during the general election campaign, we know that some of the headline figures of the lack of money for public spending and government services in the future would have to be covered somehow. And the expectation was that we would be heading for higher taxes, even though Labour was not prepared to acknowledge that fact. So there was, during the election, an element of the Labour Party, you could call it, I don't know, a conjuring, a trick, a certain element of denial for use on the doorsteps and on polling day. But here you've got something you describe as shocking and surprising and serious. And David, if it was a deception, pure and simple, well, they couldn't hope to get away with it, could they? Because there's going to be evidence from the Treasury and every government department deployed in front of House of Commons select committees to the OBR, studied by people like you. Rachel Reeves is clearly confident that she can stand up her story.
Well, I think if you kind of dig into the details of the document, which I've been doing actually while also speaking, there's a couple of bits one can kind of question, exactly what the, assumptions underlying here. There's a line for what it calls as normal reserve claims and working out whether actually there's, that's not overlapping at all with on the other items that are in there, like, for example, the health pressures or the asylum seeker pressures. I'm sure there'll be more work digging into this, and we will get a clearer picture during the course of the year on how these things are playing out.
Yeah.
But I think you're right that, on some of these areas, if asylum costs are going to be 6.5 billion more than this, what's in the budget already for that, rail pressures 3 billion. These are substantial amounts of money that would have come out of the woodworks down the line.
Yeah.
Now, on the politics of it, just briefly, I'm not a politician, or it's not really the sort of role of IFS to get too far to the politics. But I think, I wouldn't say this is performative, but I think it is, of course, in the context of the difficult decisions, not just for the current financial year, which is what this statement was really all about, but the really difficult plans for future years. Both the Conservatives and Labour had sort of penciled in 1% a year increases in spending from 25-26 onwards. Now, when you work out what the NHS needs, expansions of childcare and so on and so forth, that would have meant many other areas facing cuts. That's still the case now. And what this is really saying is that the starting position was even worse than we thought.
Yeah.
So if we are going to have to make cuts down the line or put taxes up down the line, that makes that problem bigger.
Okay, the shock is real. The anger is genuine. The state of public finances and the consequences of that are worse, every bit as bad and worse than we suspected. But is it also an exercise in piling blame performatively on the opposition? Well, it's that too, because this is economics and this is politics. And we are watching now as that drama's unfolding at Westminster. As I speak, there's going to be a news conference from the Chancellor later on in the day. We'll have that live for you after 6. And we'll keep you right up to date with what is going on in the Commons now. And a lot is going on in the Commons as they try to digest the statement from Rachel Reeves and what it means.